Mornings with Zerlina. Katie Paris is the founder of Red Wine and Blue. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Give me your reaction to the results in Ohio. We talked about this earlier, last month before this all went down.
Blown away. So proud to be an Ohioan today. I can't stop looking at these county by county results. You know, at Red, White, and Blue, we organize suburban women, and I look at every single suburban county where we have been trying to, every election cycle, you know, build a few more points of support for progress. And last night, these results just in one county after another just blew away expectations. The turnout in our urban counties was everything and more that I could have hoped for. The benchmark was supposed to be last year's May primary because it was for a very competitive U.S. Senate race on the Republican side. Turnout, Zerlina, yesterday was 75% higher than that race in August. So, yeah, incredible.
No, it's so amazing to see high turnout when it matters, because it demonstrates that when you speak directly to the voters about what's at stake, they show up. What do you think it says about Republican overreach in Ohio?
I think it says Republican overreach is not acceptable to voters. I mean, this was such a clear rejection of Republican extremism. This was a below-the-belt power grab. They just went way too far. The hypocrisy was blatant. And I think voters saw through it. We also really want to protect our reproductive rights. And they were explicit and admitted that this was about getting in our way. And, you know, I was a part of a coalition that helped collect 710,000 signatures in the state to get reproductive rights on the ballot. You know, nothing is going to stop us from passing reproductive freedom in November. And I just think people came together and really, really galvanized. I also think it was a rejection of the disinformation campaign that we saw in the last few weeks here just crank up as well. And it was, I mean, it was horrible. It was pretty disgusting. My organization and me personally were targeted by it in fake newspapers, called horrible names. Just people were lied to. And I think that people saw that desperation. I can't tell you how many people who contacted me saying, well, I'm throwing this in the garbage and I'm going out to vote and I'm bringing everyone I know with me.
No, I feel like one of the things that I'm looking at when I see such high turnout, when I see disinformation, and I think what's accurately described, what you accurately described as desperation, that feels to me like they know that people are angry. They know people, if they're given all this information about what's happening, they're pissed. They're pissed enough to go vote. They're pissed enough to get all of their friends and go vote. When you think about the anger post-Dobbs, it's persistent. People are hot over this.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know up till this point, you know, since Roe was overturned, reproductive freedom is 6 for 6 in America. Anytime it's been on one of these statewide ballots, reproductive freedom has won. And, you know, I think that in many ways yesterday was a proxy vote. We knew that we had to say no yesterday in order to get to vote yes in November. In fact, that's what we told every single voter who signed the petitions to get reproductive rights on the ballot. We said, okay, just want to make sure you understand this is just to get it on the ballot. Now you got to vote no in August and yes in November. Like, it's kind of a lot, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot to do. But it shows how motivated people are. I think the backlash to jobs will continue. I think that, of course, we're going to continue to hear vulnerable Republicans and pundits say that, you know, somehow women are going to forget. But this is intensifying because this issue,
funny.
I know, right? But it's a thing. Like, there's articles.
I don't think any women pundits will say that. Unless they're paid by Republican entities. I mean, honestly, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like that's such a funny. I thought that coverage, and to your point, I thought that coverage right before the 2022 midterms was so obviously men thinking this thought that Dobbs wasn't going to upset too many people, that women really cared more about the cost of eggs than their bodily autonomy, that we're like, inflation and gas is so much more important than whether or not I can decide what happens to my body, whether or not I will be forced to give birth as mandated by the government. I mean, like, I think that don't you feel like there's obviously a male perspective that is making maybe even the Republicans think that women are going to forget or not be as mad 6 months from now. I'm going to be mad if I don't have bodily autonomy 6 months from now, too.
I mean, I think there is a difference in personal experience, right? I mean, like, when your friends are having complications in their pregnancies, the ins and outs of what happened, through those difficulties.
Yeah.
Many of us have had real complications in our pregnancies, and these are things that women really talk about. I have seen a lot of dads and a lot of husbands step up to the plate and really get involved in this issue. But those who are not really listening and wanting to understand those experiences, maybe it's just easier to kind of like black it out. I don't know. But I think what they're not getting in terms of more than half of the electorate, which is women, is how personal this is. And they don't get that, like, oh, well, if someone didn't have an abortion, and doesn't want to get an abortion every Tuesday, then, like, what does this have to do with you? And it's just so much bigger than that in terms of the impact on our reproductive rights. And with every month that passes since Roe was overturned, there's just another story in the news, another friend who, look at the women in Texas, Amanda Zerlina, and how cruelly they've been treated by the state and yet have prevailed. That resonates deeply with women, and as time passes, it's not going to fade more distant into our memory. It's going to sear more deeply into our hearts and minds.
It's because we're going to hear more stories, right? Remember at the beginning of all of this, the 10-year-old girl, that was a girl from Ohio. So I think the more that the more this persists and we don't have the rights, right, the more angry we're going to get because there are more horrific stories we'll hear. One of the things that I think is very important about Ohio is it demonstrates that Republicans will and are attempting to change the rules because they're in the minority. They will be in the minority in many states and already are in some. When you think about the idea of, like, the tyranny of the minority and the way they're trying to change the rules, do you think it's a response to the demographic shift we're literally undergoing right now, and the idea that their ideas and their voters will be a minority soon? They're freaking out.
Yeah, and that hasn't quite happened in Ohio yet. But, if we're working really hard here to get all of our eligible voters enfranchised, which is hard in a state that doesn't want to see that. But yeah, they're absolutely scared, and they do see the multiracial coalition that represents democracy and progress disagrees with them. And that is a cross-partisan coalition, as we very much saw last night. You can't win in Ohio 56, 57%, which is where this is landing, without a lot of Republicans and independents. And so they know that the voters disagree with them. So, yeah, they've got to change the rules. They've got to make it harder for that disagreement to be expressed. It's the same thing that they've done with partisan gerrymandering, and how, here in Ohio, last year we voted on unconstitutional maps because again and again, even our Republican state Supreme Court said that those maps were not constitutional, and they just didn't comply. So we voted with unconstitutional maps, and so that was against the rules. They tried to change the rules here. I mean, last year they outlawed elections in August because there was a primary held, and there was 8% turnout. And they thought, oh, well, that's probably not very representative of voters, so we shouldn't do that anymore. And then they reversed themselves because they want to stop the reproductive freedom ballot initiative this November, and that required changing the rules ahead of November. And they thought that they would slide through here with very low turnout, that they would be able to turn out their base and that nobody else would kind of, notice, like it's the middle of summer, and that's just not what happened. And we had this huge, huge turnout. I think it surprised them a great deal. And that's when the desperation really kicked in. And I think that there's backlash even to that. It just made it worse. It turns out people want to actually have a voice.
They do want to have a voice. They will be able to have a voice again in November when there is the vote to codify abortion rights. Katie Ferris, thank you so much from Red, Wine, and Blue for joining us this morning to talk about Ohio.